weeks ago, I told you a story about something I did that I was super proud of. Something that took a lot of work and something that ultimately made me a better person. Today, I'm gonna tell you about possibly the stupidest thing that I have ever done and almost got me killed. Okay, maybe I'm being a little bit dramatic, but really, this was dumb and I could have gotten really, really hurt. But for you to understand, we've got to rewind the clock a few years. It's 2016 and I am in Cuba with my brother Caleb and his wife Jericho. Now, one thing that you need to know about Cuba is the people there are really relaxed. Really relaxed. And honestly, there aren't that many rules. And the rules that they do have are flexible. Keep that in mind. It's gonna come back up later in the story. But Caleb and Jericho are both experienced scuba divers. They've traveled all over the world to dive. But me, I had never even worn a wetsuit before. So it's safe to say we're off to a bit of a rocky start. So after a few lessons, the good people of Cuba decided that I was ready to strap in, put in the air hose, and go scuba diving. So we all loaded up on a small boat and we headed out into the unknown. We arrive at our dive site and we're told to get over the sides and explore. Awesome, right. Well, one important rule is that we're all supposed to stay together. But once we got down there, I was so captivated by the beauty of the Caribbean Sea, it didn't take long for me to get separated from the group. And I found myself alone, underwater, in a different part of the world, with only a certain amount of air left. Yikes. But it gets worse. Really, it does. So I looked around for my group, but I didn't see anybody. Nobody's to the left, nobody's to the right. But I did see something. I did see something so cool that I had to check it out. I saw an underwater cave. Yeah, okay, I know you know where this is going, but hindsight is 20/20. So I'm in the cave, and very, very quickly, the cave is becoming a tunnel. And that tunnel is shrinking fast. And it's no time at all before the diameter of the tunnel is just barely wider than me. And you might be thinking, well, this is the logical time to just go backwards. And you're right. However, I chose not to do that. With sharp coral cutting my arms and my body, I pushed through and my oxygen levels were getting lower and lower with each breath. I shoved and pushed, getting stuck on the rocks, having to push my body through, getting stuck, getting cut in this narrowed passageway alone, underwater, in a different country, with only a certain amount of oxygen left. In this series, we're talking about freedom and rules and how those two things can coexist. Whether you're fighting your parents about your independence or you're trying to figure out how to live out your faith, we all occasionally push back on the rules just a little bit, especially the ones that we don't like. Whether it's dating or entertainment or the words we say or the friends that we have, how often do you ask this question? How far is too far? How close to the line can I get without technically doing something wrong? How much can I get away with before I get in trouble? How much can I bend the rules before they break? Of course, some rules need to be questioned, and sometimes rule bending isn't the end of the world. But when does rule bending become dangerous for us and for others? How far is too far? If you remember, James wrote a letter to help the Church of Jerusalem figure out how to live by God's law. James wasn't necessarily talking about the hundreds of religious laws that the Jewish people were accustomed to following at that point. The law that James wanted people to obey was the law that Jesus gave to love God and love others just like we love ourselves. According to Jesus, if you follow the law of love, that's the rule that matters most. Even though this law sounds simple, it sounds simple, it isn't always easy. And especially not for the early Jesus followers, it wasn't easy to know how to love God or others. And maybe it's not always easy for you either. I know it's not easy for me always. When James wrote this letter, people were figuring out how to follow Jesus for the first time. But Jesus was no longer with them. And without Jesus in the flesh, they couldn't just ask for help or clarity when they had a question. So, to help the Church of Jerusalem figure this out, here's what James wrote in James chapter 1, verses 5 to 8. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it'll be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and is unstable in all they do. What is wisdom? Wisdom is the ability to discern between right, wrong, and everything in between. And believe me, sometimes there's a lot in between. See, in many situations, there's not always a clear right or wrong choice. Instead, we might have to choose between what's good and what's best, or what's fun and what's risky. And that's why we need wisdom. Without wisdom, it's difficult to see the danger that we could bring on ourselves or others. But with wisdom's help, we can see danger ahead. We can avoid harmful situations long before it's too late. Learn how to escape an already messy situation. And you might be asking, well, how do we get wisdom then? James's solution is pretty simple. He says that all we need to do is ask for it. But how do we ask God for wisdom? Do we just pray and wait for God's voice to answer us from the sky? No. That's not how God speaks to us most of the time. When we ask God for wisdom, the answer for our prayer might come through people. You might find wisdom in a conversation with a mentor, a friend, a teacher, a parent, or a trusted adult. It may even come through a book or movie or song or a speech from somebody that you've never even met. Sometimes wisdom will come through experience, and nobody likes to experience failure or difficulty, but God can always redeem difficult situations by helping us gain wisdom through our experiences. It can be tough, but experience is a great teacher. History, there are a lot of people that have gone before us and passed down important lessons that they've learned. We can gain wisdom by looking at the ideas, practices, and guidelines that have been passed down from previous generations. And lastly, if you want wisdom, we have Scripture. God wrote us a book filled with wisdom. Okay, back to my story earlier. I ended up being fine, obviously. I eventually made it to a spot wide enough for me to turn around, and I crawled back out to find a very annoyed Cuban scuba instructor and an equally annoyed group of people who paid to dive that had to wait around until they found me. My decision to ignore those rules meant that I could have gotten hurt, really hurt. All it would have taken is for me to get stuck or a part of that sharp coral to puncture my air hoses. Who knows what could have happened? There were rules in place to keep me safe, and there are rules in place to keep us safe. When I ignored those rules, I put myself in serious danger. When you're frustrated or fed up with all the rules that you have to follow, remember that God or other people in authority don't just give us rules to control us. It's because they want us to live a life free from unnecessary hurt. Remember, a wise person doesn't ask, how close to danger can I get? A better question is, how far from danger can I stay? The right rules set us free, and free people do not dance with danger.